I'm back.
I see that. You're early.
Am I?
I thought you had the 4 o'clock infusion.
I did. They finished early. Whose bag is that, Julian? I didn't think you'd be back until later, Imara. Clearly.
We need to talk, but not like this. Not with you looking...
Looking like what? Sick? Bald under this scarf? Say it.
That's not what I meant.
Whose box is on my porch?
I was gonna bring some things to your mother's. I thought you'd be more comfortable there.
You were moving me out.
I was making room.
You moved her suitcase into my house while I was at chemotherapy.
It's not what it...
Don't finish that sentence. I have had rounds of things put in my body this year to stay alive. Never lied to you.
I can't keep living like this. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how that sounds.
Looking back, I always told them the porch wasn't where my marriage ended. It ended 4 months earlier, in a doctor's office, the moment I heard the word cancer.
The suitcase was still on the porch when I pulled into the driveway. Not mine. I recognized that the moment I saw it. Pale gold hardshell, a luggage tag shaped like a small brass leaf. I had seen that suitcase before, in the trunk of a car parked outside Julian's office, on a Tuesday I wasn't supposed to notice. I did not get out of the car right away. I sat there with my hand on the door handle, my headscarf slightly crooked in the rearview mirror, and I watched my husband come out of our front door, carrying a cardboard box of my things. Not hers. Mine. He set the box down on the porch step, next to the suitcase, like they belonged to the same sentence. I got out of the car slowly. 6 weeks post-chemo does that to a person. Slow becomes the only speed you have. He looked up and saw me, and something moved across his face that I had never once seen there in 11 years of marriage. Not guilt exactly, inconvenience. Imara, you're early. Am I? I thought you had the 4 o'clock infusion. I did. I walked toward the porch. My legs did not want to carry me quickly, so they carried me with a terrible, deliberate calm that I would later understand looked, from the outside, like strength. They finished early. Whose bag is that, Julian? He didn't answer. Behind him, in the doorway of the house I had chosen the paint colors for, the house where I had recovered from my first surgery on that exact porch swing, a woman stepped into the light. Solange. I knew her name before he ever said it out loud, because I had learned, somewhere in the last 4 months, to memorize the names of people my husband mentioned a little too carefully. Imara? Her voice was quiet, not smug. That surprised me more than anything else that evening. I had built her in my mind into someone gleaming and cruel, and instead she stood in my doorway looking like she wanted the floor to open beneath her. I didn't think you'd be back until later. Clearly, I said. Julian stepped between us, which was, I would think later, the most honest gesture he made all evening, protecting her instinctively, without having decided to. We need to talk, he said, but not like this. Not with you looking. Looking like what, Julian? My voice did not shake. I want that understood. It did not shake. Sick? Bald under this scarf? Say it. That's not what I meant. Whose box is on my porch? He glanced down at the cardboard box like he'd forgotten it was there. I was going to bring some things to your mother's. I thought, with everything, you'd be more comfortable there. Somewhere quieter. You were moving me out. I was making room. The words landed and did not immediately hurt, the way a burn doesn't immediately hurt. Solange made a small sound behind him, not quite a protest, and looked away toward the hydrangeas I had planted the spring before my diagnosis. Room, I repeated. For her. Imara, you moved her suitcase into my house while I was at chemotherapy. It's not what it... Don't, I said. Don't finish that sentence. I have had 4 rounds of poison put into my body this year to keep myself alive, Julian, and I have never once, not one single time, lied to you about what was happening to me. Do me the same courtesy. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at nothing. The porch light buzzed faintly overhead, the way it always had, the way it would have on any ordinary evening in the 11 years before this one. Julian finally looked at me, really looked, the way he used to before all of this, before hospitals and words like stage 2 and margins and 5-year survival rate had rearranged the furniture of our marriage. "I can't keep living like this," he said quietly. "I know how that sounds. I know exactly how that sounds, but I can't." I looked at the box. I looked at the suitcase with its little brass leaf. I looked at my husband, standing in the doorway of the life we had built, already halfway out of it. Looking back, I would say much later, to people who asked how I survived that year, I always told them the porch wasn't where my marriage ended. It ended 4 months earlier, in a doctor's office, the moment I heard the word cancer, and Julian realized, before I even understood what it meant for myself, that he did not have what it would take to stay. 4 months earlier, none of this had seemed possible. I want to be honest about that, because it is easy, once a marriage has ended, to pretend it was always ending, to go back through the years with a red pen and mark every small failure as evidence of the collapse to come. I won't do that to the 11 years Julian and I had. Some of them were good. Some of them were the best years of my life. We met the ordinary way, a mutual friend's wedding, a conversation about a building neither of us liked the look of, an argument about brutalist architecture that lasted until the reception ended and continued over coffee 2 days later. Julian was an architect, sharp and a little vain about it, the kind of man who could make you feel like the only interesting person in a room simply by asking the right question. I ran my own interior design studio. Small then, ambitious always. We were both people who liked to build things that would outlast us. It felt, in the beginning, like the most natural thing in the world to try to build a life together. He proposed on the roof of a building he'd designed, the one that made his career, the one that still has his name on a small brass plaque in the lobby. I said yes before he finished the sentence. My mother, Cecilia, cried at the wedding in a way that embarrassed her for years afterward. My brother Kendrick gave a toast that was, by his own admission, too long and too honest, about how he'd never seen me let anyone see me fully before Julian. That was true. I have always been careful with myself. Careful with who gets access to the parts of me that are frightened, or uncertain, or small. Julian, for a long time, was the person I was least careful with. I told him things. I let him see me cry after my father died, let him hold me through nights I couldn't have gotten through alone. I believed, the way you believe things you have never had reason to question, that he would always be that kind of safe. The diagnosis came on an ordinary Tuesday in February. I remember the specifics with a clarity that still surprises me. The particular gray of the sky outside Dr. Okafor's window, the small chip in the corner of her desk, the way she folded her hands before she said the word. Imara, the biopsy results are back. It's breast cancer, stage 2. I want to walk you through what we're looking at, and I want you to know up front. This is treatable. This is not a death sentence. But it is going to be a fight, and I need you to understand that before we go any further. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I needed to call my noon client and cancel a fabric consultation. I remember Julian's hand finding mine on the small vinyl chair beside me, and how tightly he held it, and how his voice cracked slightly when he asked Dr. Okafor his first question. Not what happens now, but what does she need from me? I loved him so much in that moment that I could not have imagined, not for 1 second, the man who would stand on our porch 4 months later with someone else's suitcase in his hand. Whatever you need, he told me that night, sitting on the edge of our bed while I stared at the ceiling and tried to make the word cancer sit still long enough to understand it. I mean that, Imara. Whatever you need. I'm not going anywhere. He meant it. I believe, Still, that he meant it in that moment. The way people mean the vows they make before they understand what those vows will actually cost them. The first weeks were almost, I hesitate to use this word, but it's the true one, beautiful, in the strange way that crisis sometimes clarifies love before it erodes it. Julian drove me to every consultation. He read everything, printed articles, asked Dr. Okafor questions I hadn't thought to ask. He learned to cook the bland, careful meals I could keep down after the first round of chemo began. He held my head over the toilet at 2 a.m. and did not once make me feel like a burden for needing him to. My best friend Priscilla, who had known me since university and had never once been shy about her opinions, watched all of this with the kind of guarded hope you extend to a marriage you've had private doubts about. "He's really stepping up," she told me, the week after my first infusion, sitting beside my hospital bed with a magazine she wasn't reading. "I'll give him that. You sound surprised." "I sound cautious," she said. "There's a difference. Anyone can be good in the first month, Imara. I want to see who he is in the 6th. I laughed at her then. I told her she worried too much, that she'd never fully trusted Julian, not since the wedding toast Kendrick gave that she'd agreed with more than she ever admitted. I told her that some men rise to meet the hardest thing that's ever happened to their wife, and that Julian was one of them. I was not wrong about the first month. I was not wrong about the second. It was somewhere in the 3rd month, after the hair started coming out in the shower, after the fatigue became something closer to a second gravity, after the woman I used to be began to feel like a photograph of someone I'd once known, that I started to notice the small absences. A dinner he didn't come home for, explained by a client emergency, a phone he began keeping face down on the counter, a habit he'd never had before. A new colleague's name, Solange, appearing in his conversation with a frequency that felt, at first, like nothing at all, and then, slowly, like something I was choosing not to look at directly. "She's just handling the Ashworth account with me," he said, the one time I asked, careful to keep my voice light, careful not to sound like a woman who had learned, somewhere in her illness, to be afraid of her own husband's affection running out. "She's talented. It's not... Imara, don't do this. Don't make this into something. I'm not making anything into anything," I said. I asked a question. It felt like an accusation. I let it go. I want to be honest about that too. I let it go because I did not have the strength that month to fight 2 things at once, and because some part of me, the part that had loved him since a wedding reception a decade earlier, did not want to know what I was starting to suspect. Dr. Okafor, at my next appointment, asked the question doctors are trained to ask, and rarely get honest answers to. "How's your support system holding up, Imara? Home life? Your husband?" I thought about the face-down phone. I thought about the dinner he hadn't come home for. I thought about the way his hand had started to feel, some nights, like it was resting on mine out of habit rather than need. "He's here," I said. "He's trying." It was true. It was also, I would come to understand, already the beginning of the sentence I would use for the rest of that year to describe a marriage that was leaving me slowly enough that I could tell myself, for a little while longer, that it wasn't leaving at all. The isolation did not arrive all at once. It arrived the way water finds its way into a foundation, quietly, through cracks too small to notice, until one day the whole structure is standing in something it can no longer pretend isn't there. Julian stopped coming to every appointment. He apologized each time, a client meeting, a deadline, a site inspection that couldn't be rescheduled, and each apology was, on its own, reasonable enough that I could not build a case against it. It was only an aggregate. Only when I looked at the calendar in April and counted the appointments he'd missed against the ones he'd attended, that I understood something had shifted. Priscilla started coming instead. She took a leave from her own consulting work, never made a show of it, never once let me feel guilty for needing her, and she sat with me through infusions Julian used to sit through, held the small plastic basin when the nausea came, drove me home in silence when I didn't have words left for the day. "Where's Julian?" the chemo nurse, a kind, sharp-eyed woman named Abena, asked one Thursday in April, when Priscilla and I had become such regulars in that infusion room that the staff knew our names. "Work," I said. Abena didn't say anything to that, but I saw something pass across her face. Not judgment exactly, but the particular recognition of a woman who has watched this specific story unfold in that specific chair more times than she would ever tell a patient directly. My mother, Cecilia, was less careful with her face. "He used to call me every week," she said, one Sunday, sitting across from me at my kitchen table while I picked at a plate of food I didn't have the appetite for, "to ask how you were really doing, underneath what you tell people. He hasn't called me in a month, Imara." "He's stretched thin," I said. "The Ashworth project is huge for the firm. Imara." My mother has a particular way of saying my name that has never once in 40 years failed to make me tell her the truth. "Look at me. Is something happening that you are not telling me?" I did not answer her that day. I want to be honest about why. It was not because I didn't know. It was because saying it out loud, to my mother, in the middle of the hardest year of my life, would have made it real, in a way I did not yet have the strength to survive. I found out for certain in May. It was not dramatic, the way these discoveries are dramatic in the stories people tell. There was no scene, no confrontation, no dramatic slam of a laptop shutting. It was a text message that arrived on Julian's phone while it sat, for once, face up on the kitchen counter, while he was in the shower and I was making tea because my stomach could not yet handle solid food. "Miss you already. Come by after your run tomorrow? Solange." I stood in my kitchen, holding a mug of chamomile tea, with my bald head wrapped in a soft cotton scarf, and I read that message 4 times, as though repetition might change what it said. I did not confront him that night. I have thought, many times since, about why, whether it was cowardice, or exhaustion, or some instinct toward self-preservation that understood I did not have the physical strength that month to survive both a fight with my husband and a fight with my own body. I think it was the last one. I think some part of me made a calculation, without fully admitting it was making one. Survive the cancer first. Deal with the marriage after. It was a decision I would come to see, later, as both the wisest and the most costly thing I did that year. I told Priscilla 2 days later, in the parking lot outside the infusion center, sitting in her car, because I did not trust myself to say it out loud inside my own house. "I found a text," I said, on his phone. Priscilla did not ask what it said. She had, I think, been waiting for this conversation for weeks. She reached over and took my hand, not my husband's, and she held it the way you hold something you are trying to keep from shattering. "Okay," she said. "Okay, what do you want to do?" "I don't know," I said, and it was the truest thing I had said in months. "I genuinely do not know, Priscilla. I am fighting for my life. I do not have anything left over to fight for my marriage too." "You don't have to fight for it," Priscilla said quietly. "You just have to decide whether you want to keep it." I did not have an answer for her that day. I would not have one for another 2 months, not until the evening I came home early from chemotherapy and found a suitcase with a small brass leaf sitting on my porch, and understood, all at once and without any more room for doubt, that the question had already been answered for me. The days after the porch are the ones I remember least clearly, and I think that is the body's mercy, the way it sometimes blurs the exact texture of the worst moments so that we can keep living through the ones that come after. I did not go into the house that night. Priscilla came and got me. I called her from my car, parked 3 streets away, where I had driven without any memory of driving, and she arrived within 20 minutes with a blanket and a thermos of the ginger tea that was the only thing that didn't make my stomach turn. "You don't have to talk about it yet," she said, pulling out of the neighborhood while I sat wrapped in the blanket, shaking in a way that had nothing to do with the mild spring evening. "You just have to breathe. That's the only job right now." I stayed with my mother that week. Cecilia did not say I told you so, though she would have been within her rights to. She simply made up my old bedroom, the one I had slept in as a teenager, with fresh sheets and a lamp that still worked, and she sat with me the first night, while I cried in a way I had not let myself cry since the diagnosis itself. Not for the cancer this time, but for the marriage, which felt, in that moment, like a second and unrelated grief stacked on top of the first. "I don't understand," I said to her, somewhere around midnight. "I don't understand how someone can hold your hand through a diagnosis and then do this." My mother, who had been married to my father for 31 years before he died, and who had buried a husband and raised 2 children, largely on her own resilience, considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Some people," she said slowly, "love you very much, right up until loving you starts to cost them something. Your father used to say, the truest test of a person isn't what they promise you in the good years. It's what they choose when there's nothing in it for them anymore." She smoothed the blanket over my knees, an old habit from my childhood. "Julian chose. That tells you something you needed to know, even if you didn't want to know it." Julian called the next morning, and the morning after that. I did not answer for 4 days, not out of strategy, but because I genuinely did not have the strength to hear his voice yet, did not trust what it would do to the careful, fragile equilibrium I was building hour by hour, just to keep functioning through my treatment. When I finally did answer, on the 5th day, his voice sounded exactly the way I expected it to. Apologetic, careful, already reaching for the language of a man trying to manage a situation, rather than repair one. "Imara, thank God. Can we talk? Not about everything. Just, can we talk about logistics? The house, your things." "My things," I repeated. "I don't want this to be ugly," he said. "I want to do this the right way." "There is no right way to do this, Julian." My voice, I noticed, was very calm, calmer than I felt. "You moved another woman's suitcase into my house while I was at chemotherapy. There is no version of the right way available to you anymore. You used it up." He was quiet for a moment. "I know how it looked. How it looked. Something in me, some reserve I had not known I still had, finally cracked open. Julian, I have spent this entire year learning how to survive my own body turning against me. I have thrown up more times than I can count. I have lost my hair. I have sat in a plastic chair for 6 hours at a time, while poison drips into my veins to keep me alive, and the entire time, I told myself that I still had you, that whatever else was happening to me, my marriage was the one thing I didn't have to fight for, and you were making room on the porch." "I panicked," he said, and for the first time, something in his voice sounded less rehearsed. "I didn't know how to be married to someone who might. Imara, I didn't know how to live with the possibility of losing you. Solange didn't ask me to fall apart. I fell apart on my own, and she happened to be there when I did." It was, I would think later, the most honest thing he ever said to me, and also the most damning. He had not been stolen from me. He had walked away from something difficult, toward something easier, and told himself a story about panic that let him avoid the plainer word, cowardice. "That's not an excuse," I said. "That's a confession." I did not go back to the house that week, or the next. I hired a lawyer, a sharp, unsentimental woman named Ijeoma, who specialized in cases exactly like mine, and who told me, in our first consultation, something I have never forgotten. You don't have to decide today whether you want the marriage to end, Ijeoma said, but you do have to decide, today, that you are not going to let him rewrite what already happened. Facts matter, Imara. Document everything. Protect yourself financially. You can be gracious later, if you choose to be. Right now, be precise. I was precise. I moved the remainder of my things out over 2 carefully organized weekends, with Kendrick and Priscilla helping, while Julian stayed conveniently absent both times, at Solange's apartment, I assumed, though I did not ask and he did not offer. I finished my treatment from my mother's house, the last 2 rounds of chemo, then the weeks of radiation that followed, driven each day by Priscilla or Kendrick, or, twice, by Abena from the infusion center, who had become, somewhere in that year, less a nurse and more a friend. I rang the small brass bell at the end of treatment, the one every cancer center seems to have, the tradition that marks the last day of active treatment, with my mother on one side of me and Priscilla on the other, and Julian was not there. I want to say that absence broke something in me. It did not. By that point, it simply confirmed what I already understood. The bracelet, the plain hospital identification band I had worn through every single infusion, every scan, every appointment, faded now to a soft, illegible gray. I did not throw away. I do not fully know why that day. I only knew I was not ready to let it go, though I could not yet have told you what it meant to keep it. There was one evening, before the divorce papers were filed, that I have never told anyone about in full. Not even Priscilla, not even my mother. Julian came to my mother's house, uninvited, on a night when I was alone in the guest room because Cecilia had gone to her weekly card game and Kendrick was out of town. I almost didn't let him in. I stood at the door with the chain still latched, looking at him through the gap, and I remember thinking how strange it was that a man I had shared a bed with for 11 years now looked, to me, like something I needed a locked door between. 5 minutes, he said. Please, Imara. I'm not asking to come back. I just need you to hear something. I let him in, against every instinct that told me not to, and we sat at my mother's kitchen table, the same table where I had sat, months earlier, telling Cecilia I didn't know what was happening in my marriage, back when I still had the luxury of not knowing for certain. I keep replaying it, Julian said, turning a coffee mug in slow circles without drinking from it. The porch, the way you looked at me, I've tried to explain it to myself 100 different ways, and none of them hold up. I told myself I was overwhelmed. I told myself I was protecting myself from watching you, from the possibility of losing you. But none of that's actually true, is it? The truth is just that it got hard, and I found something easier, and I let myself have it. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. It doesn't change anything. I know it doesn't, he said. I think I needed to say it out loud to someone who'd know if I was lying. You always knew when I was lying, Imara, even about small things. I used to think that was inconvenient. I think now it might have been the best thing about being married to you. I never had to wonder whether I was fooling myself. You wouldn't let me. I studied him for a long moment. This man who had held my hand in an oncologist's office, who had also, months later, boxed up my belongings while I sat in a chemotherapy chair, believing myself safe. I'm not going to tell you it's okay, I said. Because it isn't, and I don't think it's my job anymore to make you feel better about what you did. But I'll tell you this, because I think it's true, and because some part of me still doesn't want you to walk through the rest of your life without understanding it. The version of you that showed up in Dr. Okafor's office that first day, that man was real. I don't doubt that anymore. I think you're also the man who left a suitcase on my porch. I don't know how to reconcile those two men, Julian. I'm not sure you do either. But I'm done trying to hold both of them for you. That's your work to do, not mine. He left not long after that, and I sat alone at my mother's kitchen table for a long time afterward, turning the same coffee mug he'd left behind in slow circles, the way he had, until I understood that whatever grief I still owed that marriage, I had, in that conversation, finally finished paying it. Solange, I would later learn, was not the villain I had built her into during those long infusion afternoons when I had nothing to do but imagine her face. I met her once more, months after the porch, not by accident, but because Ioma's office required a mediation session for the division of certain shared property, and Solange arrived with Julian, sitting slightly apart from him in a way that told me something had already begun to shift between them. She asked to speak with me privately afterward, in the hallway outside the conference room, and I agreed, more out of curiosity than any generosity of spirit. "I'm not going to apologize for falling in love with him," she said, and I respected, even then, that she did not pretend otherwise. "But I am going to apologize for the timing, for not asking harder questions about what kind of man does what he was doing while his wife was going through what you were going through. I told myself he was struggling. I let that be enough of an explanation for a long time." She looked down at her hands. "It wasn't enough of an explanation. I understand that now. Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think you deserve to know that I see it clearly," she said. "What he did, what I let myself be a part of. I'm not telling you this to be forgiven. I don't expect that. I just didn't want you walking away from this thinking I never understood what it cost you." I did not forgive her that day, and I am not certain I have fully forgiven her since. But I understood something, standing in that hallway, that surprised me. My anger had never really belonged to her. She was a person who made a choice I found unforgivable, but the marriage had not been hers to protect. It had been his. "He'll do it to you too, eventually," I said. "Not cruelly, I hope, but honestly. Not with another woman necessarily, but the first time loving you costs him something real. He'll make room on a porch." That's who he is now. I don't know if he was always that, or if something in him just broke and never got fixed. But I'd want to know that, if I were you. She did not answer. I do not know, even now, whether she believed me. The divorce proceedings were, by Ijoma's estimation, unusually clean, for the amount of history behind them. Julian did not fight the settlement with the ferocity some spouses do. There was, I think, a part of him that understood exactly what he had done, and that understanding cost him whatever appetite he might otherwise have had for a prolonged legal battle. "You're being remarkably calm about all of this," Ijoma observed, near the end of the process, reviewing the final paperwork with me in her office. "Most of my clients want blood. You seem almost, I don't know, settled." "I spent a year learning that I only have so much fight in me," I said. "I used most of mine on staying alive. I don't have any left over for revenge." "That's not weakness, you know," Ijoma said. "Some of my clients think choosing not to burn everything down means you didn't care enough to fight. I've never believed that. I think it takes a particular kind of strength to walk away clean." I thought about that for a long time afterward. The difference between the strength it takes to fight and the strength it takes to simply, finally, let something go. My business, which I had nearly let collapse during the worst months of treatment, began to recover slowly through that summer. Priscilla, without my asking, had quietly kept several of my long-term clients from drifting away, managing correspondence and reassurances in my name while I focused on staying alive. Kendrick helped me find a small apartment near my mother's house. Nothing grand, but mine. Entirely and only mine. In a way, the house with Julian had stopped being mine, long before I ever moved out of it. I remember the first night I slept there, in a bed I had chosen myself, in a room painted a color I had chosen myself, and how quiet the apartment was, and how, for the first time in over a year, the quiet did not feel like loneliness. It felt like room to become whoever I was going to be next. I still wore the hospital bracelet some days, tucked under a sleeve, a private thing, not for anyone else to see. It had stopped meaning fear by then. It had even, for a while, stopped meaning survival, in the raw, desperate sense it had meant during treatment. By that summer, it had started to mean something closer to evidence, proof that I had lived through something that should have broken me and had come out the other side changed, but whole. Word travels, in the particular small world of architecture and design that Julian and I had both built our careers inside. I heard, second-hand and then third-hand, the way these things arrive, that the Ashworth account, the one that had eaten so many of Julian's evenings during my treatment, the one that had first put Solange's name in his mouth, had fallen apart that autumn. A dispute over cost overruns, a client who felt misled, a lawsuit that named Julian's firm directly. I heard, too, that his partnership at the firm had grown strained, that the senior partners, watching a very public and very messy divorce unfold alongside a very public and very messy professional failure, had begun to ask questions about Julian's judgment that they had never had reason to ask before. I did not seek this information out. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy, in the telling, to make myself sound more virtuous than I actually was, to pretend I felt nothing when I learned these things. I felt something. I would be lying if I said I felt nothing. But what I felt was not triumph exactly. It was something closer to a quiet, sad recognition that a man who makes room on a porch for someone convenient, instead of holding on to someone difficult, often finds that convenience does not hold up particularly well under its own pressure either. Solange, I heard, moved out of Julian's apartment in October. I do not know the details, and I did not ask. I thought, briefly, of the hallway conversation outside Ijoma's office, of the thing I had told her, about porches, about what he would eventually do to her too, and I felt no satisfaction in having been right. Only a kind of tired confirmation of something I had already understood the day I watched him carry a cardboard box of my belongings out of our front door. By November, I had my hair back, short, a soft, dark cap of new growth that I had started, against all my earlier instincts, to love. My scans were clean. Dr. Okafor, at my 6-month follow-up, told me I was doing as well as she could have hoped, and something in the way she said it, as well as she could have hoped, rather than the more clinical language she usually used, told me she understood how much more than my body had been tested that year. "How's everything else?" she asked, the way she always did, at the end of the appointment. Home, support system. I thought about my mother's steady hands, about Priscilla, who had rearranged her entire life without complaint to make sure I was never alone in an infusion chair, about Kendrick, who had helped me carry boxes out of a house that used to be mine into an apartment that was entirely my own, about Abina, who still texted me on the anniversary of my diagnosis every year since, just to say she was thinking of me. Better than it's ever been, I told her, and I meant it in a way I could not have imagined meaning it, 8 months earlier, standing on a porch with a suitcase that wasn't mine, sitting between me and the life I thought I still had. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, on a cold, bright Tuesday in January, Julian called me. I almost didn't answer. My phone had stopped registering his name with the particular tightening in my chest it used to cause. By then, seeing Julian light up my screen felt less like a wound reopening and more like a mild, distant weather report from a country I no longer lived in. I answered mostly out of habit, and a little out of curiosity. Imara. His voice sounded different, thinner somehow, less certain of itself than I had ever heard it. Even in the earliest days of the diagnosis, when uncertainty had at least come dressed in urgency, this was a quieter kind of unraveling. I know I don't have the right to call you. I know that. But I didn't know who else to call. What's wrong? There was a long pause. In the background, I could hear what sounded like a waiting room, the low murmur of institutional quiet, a chair scraping against tile. "It's my father," Julian said finally. "He had a stroke this morning. I'm at the hospital. Imara, I don't know how to do this. I don't know the questions to ask. You always knew the questions to ask. You knew all of it, from everything you went through. I don't have anyone else who understands how any of this works." I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment. In my apartment, with its walls the color I had chosen, and its quiet that no longer felt like loneliness, and I let myself feel the full, complicated weight of what he was asking. I want to be honest about what went through me in that silence, because I think it is the truest part of this story. There was a part of me, old, tender, not fully healed, that wanted to go, not for him, for the version of him I had married, the man who had held my hand in Dr. Okafor's office on the worst day of my life, and asked, before anything else, "What does she need from me?" I grieved that man, in that silence, one more time, and there was another part of me, steadier and more recently built, that understood something important. That wanting to help someone, even someone who has hurt you badly, does not obligate you to abandon everything you have rebuilt in order to do it. "I'm sorry about your father," I said, and I meant it. Julian's father had never done anything but treat me kindly, in all the years I'd known him. I hope he recovers well, but Julian, I can't be the person you call when things get hard. I spent a year being the person, going through the hardest thing of my life, and you couldn't stay for that. I don't think it's fair to either of us for me to become your emergency contact now. "I know," he said, and his voice cracked in a way that, once, would have undone me entirely. "I know I don't deserve to ask you this. I keep thinking about how calm you were, through everything, even the diagnosis. Even the porch. You never fell apart the way I'm falling apart right now. I never understood how you did that. I think I called because some part of me hoped you could tell me the secret. I thought about that question for a moment, genuinely thought about it, because it deserved a genuine answer, even from him." "There's no secret," I said finally. "I fell apart plenty. I just didn't fall apart in front of the people I needed to trust me to hold things together. That's not strength exactly. It's just, I learned, that year, exactly who was actually there. And I built my life around the people who showed up, instead of the people I wished had." I paused. "You're going to have to find that out too, Julian. Who actually shows up for you, in the hospital waiting rooms of your life. I hope, for your sake, that there's someone, but it isn't going to be me anymore." I heard him exhale, a long, shaking breath. "I understand," he said. "I really am sorry, Imara, for all of it. I don't think I understood, until I was sitting in a waiting room by myself today, exactly what I threw away." "I know," I said, gently, because there was no longer any need for cruelty in this conversation. The truth, plainly stated, did not require decoration. "I hope your father is okay. Goodbye, Julian." I did not cry after I hung up the phone. I noticed that, with a kind of quiet astonishment, that I could hold that entire conversation, with all of its old ghosts, and set the phone down afterward, and feel, mostly, still. Steady myself. Priscilla came by that evening, the way she still often did, unannounced and unbothered by the informality of it, carrying a paper bag of takeout from the Ethiopian place we'd both loved since university. "You look like you had a day," she said, setting the bag on my kitchen counter, the counter in my apartment, chosen and arranged and entirely mine. "Julian called," I said. "His father had a stroke. He wanted, I don't know exactly what he wanted, someone to tell him it would be okay, I think. Someone who'd know how to sit in that particular kind of fear. Priscilla was quiet for a moment, pulling containers out of the bag with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had learned, over a very hard year, exactly how to be present without making a show of it. "How do you feel?" I considered the question honestly, the way I had learned to consider most things that year, without rushing past the discomfort of not immediately knowing the answer. "Sad," I said finally. "For him, for his father, for the marriage I actually did love, for a long time, before it stopped being something either of us was protecting." I sat down at my small kitchen table, the one Kendrick had helped me carry up 3 flights of stairs, but not sad for myself. I thought I would be, if he ever called again. I used to imagine it, in the beginning, him calling, needing me, and me feeling this terrible, vindicated ache. "I don't feel that. I just feel like someone who used to know him." "That's growth," Priscilla said, sliding a plate of injera across the table toward me. "Real growth, not the kind people perform on social media. You didn't need him to suffer to feel like your life turned out right." I thought about the hospital bracelet, still tucked in the small drawer of my nightstand, where I kept it now, no longer worn, but not discarded either. "Can I tell you something strange?" I said. "I still have my hospital bracelet. From treatment. I don't wear it anymore, but I can't seem to throw it away." "That's not strange," Priscilla said. "What does it mean to you now?" "It used to mean you were scared, right? In the beginning." "It did," I said. "And then, for a while, it meant I survived. Proof I'd lived through it." I turned my water glass slowly on the table, watching the light move through it. "But lately it means something different. I think it means I know now what I'm capable of surviving. Not just the cancer, all of it. The porch, the divorce, rebuilding everything from almost nothing. I used to think the bracelet was about illness. I think now it's about freedom. Proof that I don't have to be afraid of losing anyone, ever again, the way I was afraid of losing Julian that year. Because I already know, now, exactly what's on the other side of losing someone. And it isn't the end of me." Priscilla reached across the table and squeezed my hand, the same gesture from the parking lot outside the infusion center, all those months ago, when I had first told her about the text message on Julian's phone. "To freedom, then," she said, lifting her water glass in a small, quiet toast. "To freedom," I agreed, and for the first time in longer than I could easily remember, the word did not feel like something I was reaching for. It felt like something I already, finally, fully had. In February, almost exactly a year after my diagnosis, I went back to the infusion center, not as a patient, but as a volunteer, something Dr. Okafor had suggested months earlier, and something I had finally worked up the courage to say yes to. Abena was still there, still moving through the ward with the same brisk, generous efficiency I remembered from the worst months of my life. She hugged me tightly when she saw me, then held me at arm's length to study my face, the way nurses do when they are checking, without quite admitting it, for signs of how someone is truly doing beneath what they say out loud. "You look like yourself," she said. "The real one. I remember when you first came in here, you barely looked up from the floor." I didn't think I had anything left to look up for, I admitted. And now, I glanced around the room, at the rows of chairs, the soft beeping of infusion pumps, the particular quality of fluorescent light that never quite manages to feel gentle, no matter how hard a hospital tries. A young woman sat 2 chairs down, alone, a scarf wrapped carefully around her head, staring at her phone with an expression I recognized instantly, because I had worn it myself. "Now I have a reason to be in this room that isn't about surviving something," I said. "I get to be the person in the chair beside someone else's worst year. I didn't know, back when I was the one in that chair, that I'd ever want to come back here voluntarily, but I think I understand now why people do." I sat down beside the young woman, introduced myself, and let her talk about her diagnosis, her fear, the boyfriend who had gone quiet in the weeks since her scan came back. I did not tell her my own story in full that day. I only told her the part that mattered, that whatever happened with the people around her in the coming months, her worth had never been something any of them had the power to decide. She reached over, at the end of our conversation, and touched the faded gray hospital bracelet I still wore on days like that one. Not for myself anymore, but as something closer to a uniform, a way of saying, I have been where you are, and I am still here. Does it get easier? She asked. All of it, not just the treatment. It gets different, I told her honestly. Easier isn't quite the right word for any of it, but different, eventually, in ways you can't yet imagine. I promise you that. My mother asked me once, months later, at a Sunday dinner with Kendrick and his new girlfriend, and Priscilla, who had by then become such a fixture at our family table that no one thought to introduce her anymore, whether I regretted any of it. The marriage, the years spent building a life with a man who had, in the end, made room for someone else on the porch of that life, while I was fighting simply to keep breathing. I thought about the question seriously, the way I try to think about most things now, without rushing toward the easy, dignified-sounding answer, and without pretending the true one is simple. I don't regret loving him, I said finally. I was a whole person before Julian, and I was a whole person during our marriage, and I'm a whole person now, on the other side of it. He didn't make me. He also, in the end, couldn't unmake me, no matter how hard the worst year of my life tried to prove otherwise. I looked around the table, at my mother, at Kendrick, at Priscilla, at the small, steady constellation of people who had shown up, again and again, in the exact moments Julian had chosen to walk away. I think the thing nobody tells you when you're first diagnosed is that surviving the illness and surviving the betrayal require completely different kinds of strength. The illness, you fight with your body. The betrayal, that, you have to fight with something else entirely, with how you choose to see yourself, after someone has shown you, in the clearest possible terms, that they didn't see you as worth staying for. And what did you decide? My mother asked. About how you see yourself. I thought about the bracelet in my nightstand drawer. About the porch and the suitcase with its small brass leaf, and the moment I had understood, standing there in my headscarf with chemo still moving through my bloodstream, that my marriage had already ended, weeks or months before either of us said the word divorce out loud. I decided, I said, that my worth was never something Julian had the power to grant or take away in the first place. I just needed a year of losing almost everything to finally understand that clearly enough to believe it. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Kendrick, in the particular way he'd had since we were children, reached over and refilled my water glass without being asked. The way you tend to someone you love, without needing them to say they need it. To Imara, he said quietly, lifting his own glass, who built a whole new life out of a suitcase someone else left on her porch. I laughed, really laughed, the kind that comes from somewhere unguarded, and lifted my glass to meet his. Outside, the evening was ordinary and unremarkable, the kind of evening I had once feared I might never get to have again. But I was there for it, whole and steady and entirely my own, and that, in the end, was the only victory that had ever actually mattered.